Hey guys, so I wanted to show you how I made these wood doors out of cardboard. I wanted to do a quick tutorial on what I did in order to accomplish that. And first I started off with a large box from Walmart. I like the large one because of the length as well as just having extra to use so that I can make the borders on the inside of the door. Also, when you open up this box, it will break off into 4 sections, and 2 of those sections I use for the actual doors. So on the actual door, I didn't make a measurement of it. What I did was I went along the folds or the creases that the box already had. It has for each section, it has about 2 folds, and so I just went ahead and cut off one of those and discarded that extra piece. Actually, the extra piece I used as just extra scrap to kind of hold my hot glue gun on, and cut off a little section for the lower portion of the door. Now that I have my door completed, I went ahead and started working on the borders that go on the inside of the door frame, as well as the lower portion of the door. The lower portion I used just the design or decoration. On this one I'm putting an X, so I'm just making those. And actually I should have used my husband's large ruler, but he had it in the garage. I didn't want to run out there, so I just kind of winged it with the piece of cardboard that I had just to make my lines. And obviously they're not going to be straight because I didn't really care about the measurements. So they looked pretty jacked up and uneven, but once you start painting them, it's really not going to make that big of a difference. So as you guys can see, my lines that I did are pretty messed up, uneven, and probably not the width that I originally went with. But I knew that it honestly wasn't going to matter, because once you paint them, you're not going to be able to see any of those. You're not even going to be able to tell that the width isn't perfect because the paint covers all of that up. So I just went ahead and cut these out and then just put them to the side for use. So after I cut all my pieces out, I went ahead and started placing them on top of the board just to go ahead and make the border of the doors. And I cut them to the length. Again, I just cut them on the crease, so I didn't have a measurement, but I cut them to the length of the door, and then I hot glued them on. I usually have hot glue because that's what I use for a majority of my projects, and so that's what I had laying around. So that's what I used for this one as well. So once I put the borders down on the inside of the board, I went ahead and started to measure the top portion of the door. Originally, when I did the door, I didn't really have any measurements that I went by. I just kind of eyed how big I wanted that section where the window panes to be. And I just I honestly don't even remember how I did the window panes, because I really didn't have any kind of measurement then either, so I kind of just eyed everything. But anyhow, the top portion, I went ahead and measured it, and it was about 14.5 inches. I did 14.5 because I took a half off of the top for the window pane, just to give it a little bit of dimension. And you honestly don't even have to use that extra ½ inch, and just cut it how you want. And then I found a center point to use as a guide to measure the inside of the window panes. And then I used the little tape measure that I had to make the window panes. And honestly, they were not perfect. As you can see here in just a second, I was way off whenever I measured them out. But once I started cutting, I went back and I fixed that measurement a little bit just to bring it and make it somewhat even. But once you start coloring, it's honestly not going to make a difference how these look. So after I completed the top portion with the window panes, as you can see, they're really uneven, but you're not going to be able to tell too much whenever I get it done. I started working on the lower half of the door, just the little design with the X on there, and I kind of just roughly cut them how I wanted them to look. So I laid them up against the door and just kind of cut along and then hot glued them. The first piece was just a longer piece, and then the second part of the X, I used just some scraps left over, and I kind of cut those just because it's going to be two little sections that are going to be cut, so it's honestly not going to make a difference how these look too much. I kind of tried to estimate on how or where they should go, and as you can see here, that's just kind of what I'm doing with these. And once you paint them and get them touched up, again, all those little marks are not going to be seen. This one was kind of wider than I wanted it to be, so I kind of just trimmed it. I was trimming the edges here, and then I believe adding some hot glue and then just putting it down. So call me cheap, but I just used some trash bags to cover underneath the boards to prevent paint spills. And then I'm just showing off the paint that I use. It was the satin Rust-Oleum, but honestly you can use any kind of brown paint that you want. And I use the brown paint. The video that I had seen before that gave me the idea of coloring this actually had black paint, but I didn't like how dark it looked. And I wanted it to be a bit more natural looking. That other one did look natural, but it just looked a little bit too dark for me. So I wanted to just go with the brown and then just kind of build from there. And that's just kind of how it looks. I didn't cover a whole lot of it. This is the can of paint that I had. I just had some white paint left over from another project, and so I decided to use that one. And then I was going to use sort of like a whitewash effect, which I wasn't going to actually mix them together. I was just going to dip the paintbrush into the paint and then in the water to kind of thin it out. So I first dipped the brush into the paint and then in the water, and then I kind of shook it off because a couple times I did it beforehand and it actually wet the board too much, so I didn't want the boards really wet, and so I just kind of shook it off in the water beforehand. And then I kind of just did some light strokes. I didn't go really heavy whenever I was brushing it on, because if I put too much pressure, then it wouldn't come out as streaks. So I kind of did lightly in the direction that I thought that the board would look more natural. So I flipped the board and started working on the other side, and I wanted to show you guys not the oversaturated white parts that I did with too much paint, but just this little section right here. It's probably where I had a little bit of difficult on how to make it look. I started really lightly with the first coat, and then I went back. I had too much paint obviously, but I went back and did it, and I put way too much paint on there. But if you have a better method to do it, then you know, obviously use that method. But for me, this is kind of what I did and what worked for the time being. Now that I was done doing as much as I wanted to do with the white for this tutorial, I went ahead and moved on to the black. And the black, I just used some black acrylic paint that I had. It was already thin, so I didn't really have to thin it out with the water. And then I just kind of applied some light strokes onto the board. I didn't really have a method, just kind of placing the black where I wanted it and what I felt like would work and what would look good. When I first did these, I was really scared to even color because I spent so much time working on the cardboard itself that I didn't even want to paint. But after I finished painting it, you know, it looked fine, and even if it's not perfect, it'll be fine and work for your project. So after I finished putting all the strokes of the black that I wanted, of course you can see I did too thick on some sections. I went ahead and started adding the details to it. On this one, I just went along the crease where the cardboard actually was creased beforehand. And then I just kind of did some lines there, just to kind of give it the appearance of two separate boards. And then I went along and tried to add the little nail marks on there. And I found out with with my brush, at least, I had a hard time getting the circles to look how I wanted them. So I just ended up using the end of a pencil with the eraser, and I just dipped the eraser in there in the black, and then I put it on the board, and it kind of turned out the way that I liked, and the look that I was satisfied with. So I kind of did that all around the board for my little circles. So after adding the lines on the creases, I went back and just kind of added some black to the edges of the cardboard where there was actual edges that disconnected. And I kind of felt like adding those kind of gave it a little more of a weathered look and more natural look. So just kind of highlighted those edges. And then I added some white along along those nail marks, just to kind of give it, again, a little bit of dimension. And then whites up along the edges. Just kind of thin those dark edges that I initially did beforehand out. And, you know, everybody has their own style, so you obviously don't have to do what I did on these sections, so whatever works for you. So here's the final result of my door. I will say that the first ones I did look a lot better, but you know, that's going to be in the background, and not too worried about the details, and it's going to be thrown away eventually. Looks fine for its purpose. So I wanted to do a side-by-side comparison. So the door on the right is the first one that I did. The one on the left is the door from the video. You can obviously make it look tons better. I just wanted to give you guys a rough thrown together how-to. So enjoy and good luck.